For your goodness to us. Thank you for the beauty of your word. Thank you for this story in John 9, how it helps us understand so much of what the Christian life is about and how we should see ourselves and others. I pray you help us today as we talk through this text together. I pray that you help us see things that we've never seen before in a way that will bring you great glory in the world. And we pray all this in Christ's name. Amen. So today we're looking at Jesus and the man born blind, John chapter 9. This is discussion 11, so please remember to take attendance quiz 11. And before we get started, we want to continue our practice of someone introducing themselves, telling something interesting about themselves. Who would like to volunteer for today? Oh, it helps us when I know someone wants to volunteer. Any takers today? Very good. Voluntold.
Hi, my name is Tyler. I have too many things that I want to talk about.
Where you're from?
Before coming here to Bryan, I was 30 minutes away in Birchwood, Tennessee.
Oh.
Yeah.
Pretty Birchwood. Beautiful Baptist church there in Birchwood.
Yep.
And Tyler, tell us something interesting about yourself, or if you want to tell a funny story, or just hobby.
I have two brothers, two sisters, and I'm older than all of them, and they're annoying.
Are they still at home?
Some of them, yes.
Well, very good. And do you have hobbies?
Yes. I have a lot of things that I like doing. So it's,
nice.
Most recently, it's been audiobooks.
Oh yeah, I love audiobooks. What audiobook are you listening?
Actually, I'm kind of cheating in a couple of my classes and using their reading sources as audiobooks.
Nice. Thank you, Tyler. And do all of you, when you use audiobooks or when you watch video lectures, do you put it like on 2.5 or listen to it? You can listen faster than you can listen to a regular person. I talk a little slow, probably 65 words a minute. Most people talk about 100 words a minute, but you can process about 200 words a minute. So a lot of people like listening fast. Thank you for introducing yourself to us today. So what did you find interesting about the homework? Kind of an unusual story. Elijah? No, he did. Yeah. Is this your son that you say was born blind? Yeah, we've been faking it for 40 years to get the quarters. I mean, there's big time money in that. I mean, it's crazy. And then how did he do it? It's almost this just total refusal to believe. Good. What else did you find interesting in this story? Ryan?
What was important about, so every time Jesus goes and heals someone, he does it, a lot of different ways. Like, for example, when he wanted the paralyzed man, he just told him to get up and walk.
Get up, yeah.
So, I think in one of the other Gospels, whatever, he heals a blind person just by saying, open your eyes, basically, and see.
Yeah.
Why did he have to make the mud and put it on?
So, Let me try and answer, Ryan, and you tell me if you think this is a valid answer or not. The mud and spit are entirely meaningless in this story and an unimportant detail that we should just not think about. You were supposed to say, no. If the detail's there, it has to be significant. And so why? I mean, sometimes when Jesus heals people, he'll spit. There's one miracle where I think the guy can't talk, and it seems to me that Jesus may spit and touch the man or even spit on the man. And it's like, okay, I'm not sure, like, why is Jesus doing this? Because with the nobleman's servant, he just says, be healed, and he's like 25 miles away, and the guy's healed. So why is it that he's doing this mud and spit? We're actually going to talk about that, and I think it's going to be pretty interesting. What else did you find interesting about this story? Yes, tell me your name. Wes. Wes, I know your name. Good.
Something that I didn't notice before is when the people group asked if it was the blind man's sin or the sin of his parents. Jesus said it wasn't either, but yet maybe not because the sin of his parents, but it was made possible by the sin of his ancestors.
Yeah, that is a really interesting statement. And Wes, I'm glad you saw it too, because ultimately the Bible's going to say that all our sin and misery comes out of Adam's choice and then our affirmation of Adam's choice. And so the disciples are kind of taking that good theology and saying, well, who sinned? And Jesus is saying that's the wrong way to think about this situation. Don't think about, was it his particular parents or maybe in the womb he somehow sinned and it was so horrible. And Jesus is going to deal with something we see in two groups, both the disciples and the Pharisees. Both groups assume that either this man or his parents did something so bad that that's why he's in the situation he is. And so the assumption is, and the disciples equally share it, that there's something more wrong with this man than's wrong with them. And so hidden in that question is the assumption, I don't have these challenges, so I must not have been quite as bad. And that's a completely unbiblical thought. And Jesus is trying to talk about a hard truth. And he does it in a very kind and creative way. We're going to see here. That's a great observation, Wes. What else? What else did you find interesting, challenging about the homework? All right, well, let's dive in. I don't know why this isn't working. So I think my battery finally died. Or maybe this just isn't working. Oh, there it goes. There it goes. So what we're going to look at today is that all of us are born spiritually blind. And all of us must wash in the sent one to see. That's going to be kind of the fundamental truth. Jesus is the sent one. Until we wash in the sent one, we're spiritually blind. And let me ask just a question to see if this might throw some light on what we're talking about. What was Adam made out of? Dirt. Dust, mud, he's the dirt man. What does Jesus put on this man's eyes? And if we were saying it in the original language, could we say he put Adamah on this man's eyes? He put Adam, this guy has Adam on his eyes until he goes and washes in the sent one. Okay, maybe I'm starting to get like maybe what this is about. And the second thing, Jesus teaches that physical suffering ought not be thought of as a direct judgment, but rather as an opportunity for God's glory to shine. Every single one of us has challenges in life. When I look at my own life, particularly my biological origins, there is baggage, problems, mental illness, challenge, and all of those, I can say, it's part of who I am. And I could walk around saying, oh, miserable me, look at all the challenges I've had. And Jesus is saying, don't look at it that way. These challenges, there's opportunity for God's glory to shine. Don't look at what you have in life as somehow, oh, God's out to get me. Rather, look at this is going to be spectacularly glorious because God's going to do something in my life to help me with these challenges. It's a completely different way to look at suffering in the world. So what I want us to do, I want us to imagine this man's life. So the text says he was blind from birth. My daughter Abby and I were driving in today, and we were driving by Saudi Lake just as the sun was coming up. And the sun cast a beautiful purple kind of haze on the sunrise. And it was just breathtakingly beautiful to the extent that Abby filmed it. It was so beautiful. And this man had never seen anything like that. He had never seen an orange ball. He had never seen a green landscape. From the time he was a little bitty baby, he was born, his parents had such joy, and somewhere along, his first bit in life, they realized that this child is blind and can't see. And so they realized that this child was never going to experience some of the joys that other people would experience in life. And eventually he ends up what everybody ends up in a situation like that in antiquity. He's a beggar. Every single day he goes and sits outside of what would have been the local church. So it's the temple there, a beautiful building. He can't go in because he's deformed. God's law said that if you had any kind of deformity or lack, you couldn't go in to, the Garden of Eden. The Garden of Eden doesn't have stuff like that. So this man sat on the outside as people walked by him every single day of his life. And you imagine, what was his circumstance. I mean, his world is very limited. He sits at the same place. He hears the people shuffle in. If people then are like people now, don't you know that some of the kids, maybe even it was the pastor's kids, would say mean things to this guy. Look at how dirty he is. Or do you imagine if you had a cup or something, people were dropping coins, do you imagine anybody ever kicked that cup over? Or do you imagine anyone ever stole that money? Or do you imagine that one of the kids ever, pushed him and ran? And here's a guy who's blind. He's been blind his whole life. He can't do anything about it. And now he's sitting there when religious people come and in his presence ask the question, is it because this guy's such a scoundrel, or was it because his parents were such scoundrels that God has judged him and struck him down with blindness? And that's his experience of God. Other people going in to worship God, he isn't experiencing that. And the margins of society are kind of crushing this man's life. And he has no hope of anything different. The point that the Bible is trying to make and that Jesus is trying to make is that that beggar is every single one of us. Every single one of us are born with a spiritual blindness, and we're sitting outside the Garden of Eden of God's presence, and our world is very, very small. We can't experience the joys of Eden that God freely gave to all of us because ultimately our parents did rebel. Ultimately, we've ratified that rebellion and we're excluded. There's a spiritual truth there that we're all born spiritually blind. It even talks about the God of this world has blinded the minds of unbelievers. The person who has orchestrated that is the devil, and as the ultimate abuser has robbed us of our inheritance and introduced in us disease, spiritual disease and sickness. And so we're in a terrible place, and God needs to talk to us in a kind way where that truth doesn't crush us. I have a really good friend who's a very kind person to me, and I was speaking at a church one time, and I had really bad breath. And if you ever had bad breath and not known it, you go along, you're happy as a clam. Everyone else is in misery around you, right? So I'm going to speak at this church, and like at several services, and my friend needs to tell me that I have really bad breath. And so he could have just come up to me and said, dude, you've got a problem, but he didn't. He said, can I give you something? And I said, sure. So he said, shut your eyes. And so I shut my eyes. He said, hold your hands out. And so I held my hands out. And he had gone into the church reception area and got the entire bowl of Lifesavers. Like there were like 100 of them, and so he put like 100 breath mints in my hand and just looked at me and smiled, That was a very kind way, a very gracious way to make a hard point, that I had a problem that I didn't know about. Everyone else knew about, and he, in a kind way, was helping me with that. That's what's happening in this story. We're all spiritually blind. The disciples are spiritually blind, and Jesus needs to teach a hard truth, but he's going to do it in a way that doesn't crush people. And you have a good friend when, instead of ignoring your issues, the good friend comes up with a kind way to tell a hard truth. That's what's going here. So, as he passed by, he saw a blind man from birth. The disciples asked, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents were born blind? They're assuming that they're not as bad as this man, and this man had heard things like that before. And those were hurtful statements. There's an element of truth there in terms of Adam and Eve, but it's hurtful statement. This man had heard it. His life was very limited. And he's sitting outside the most beautiful place in Israel. He's sitting right here on this entryway. So this is the main entry to the huge temple complex. He's sitting here as they're going in to worship God. And when we start thinking about eyes and blindness, and if we're looking at a whole Bible biblical theology, our mind probably goes to Genesis 3:1, and the serpent said, if you do this, if you sin against God, your eyes will be opened. And what's interesting is their eyes are opened, quote unquote, but now they can't see God anymore. They can only hear God. So their eyes are open, but it's like their world becomes different. They can only hear God. They can't see God anymore. So the serpent says, see, I told you your eyes would be open, but their eyes are open to a different reality. They can't see God's reality anymore. When their eyes are opened in that way, all they can see is their own shame and nakedness, and they try to hide it from God. The New Testament talks about their minds were hardened to this day. A veil remains. They can't see the truth, the beauty. And all of this is talking about a spiritual blindness. And I think in the past, the psychology department and the education departments have done things. I think the education department used to do a thing where you carry an egg around, and it was how you have to be careful with that egg. And people are like eggs, and so always be careful. And so sometimes a lot of people would be careless, and they would break their egg over and over. And it's kind of learning, a kind way to learn, hey, always be gentle with people. And I know one department, I think it may have been psychology, would have you do an experiment where for a day you would experience life as a blind person. And so you would have to, have something that would limit your sight from the time you got up in the morning, shower, brush your teeth, till that night, and you could kind of experience what other people, what's happening. Well, the Bible is saying we're all blind, but we're blind in a way where we don't realize we're blind. We have a spiritual blindness. And so the Bible over and over will talk about God opening people's eyes. Here, the Lord opened Balaam's eyes. Elisha prayed, open my servant's eyes. The psalmist says, open my eyes that I may behold wonderful things from your law. And so when we think of this blind beggar, and if you can kind of get into the story, I imagine someone who's a little dirty, who looks blind. Maybe his eyes are milky white. It's the kind of person that you would look at and instantly you would pity the person in that situation. And so that's what the disciples are doing, but they're bringing that with the assumption somehow that this man is more evil than they are. And so Jesus is trying to correct a couple of wrong ideas, and one wrong idea is basically that I'm a good person. This guy is suffering because he's basically a bad person, and I'm not suffering because basically I'm a good person. That's not the right way the Bible would invite us to look at ourselves. And secondly, somehow that this man's situation is a judgment, and Jesus is saying no. It isn't that this man sinned or that his parents sinned, but it was that the works of God might be displayed in him. All of us face challenges. All of us have difficulties in life. And Jesus is inviting us to look at those difficulties as a way for God to shine. We might apply it to ourselves. If you're in a situation where someone has harmed you greatly, the Bible gives us a way to say, you intended to harm me, but God intended it for good. This was true evil, but God means to use even that evil to show forth his glory in the world. I think of a very effective minister, Vaughan Roberts, minister at St. Ebbe's in Oxford. Oxford is one of the most postmodern cities in the world, and I was able to go to Easter service there. My daughter was doing a semester abroad at Oxford, and I went to the church, and Oxford's the most postmodern town. This church was packed out like nobody's business. And before the service, I met Vaughan Roberts. I had known about his writings. I think this is him. He's a younger man. I don't know. The picture's kind of blurry. I think it's him. But anyway, if you know Vaughan Roberts' story, he's an evangelical minister in Oxford. He's written that little book, God's Big Picture, kind of how to read the Bible. We used to use it here in all our classes. A great book. Vaughan Roberts is pretty upfront that he's struggled with same-sex attraction his entire life. He pretty upfront about it. He says, but the way I look at that is not that this is somehow God's curse on me, but rather in the power of Jesus, I'm going to live a celibate life, and it's going to be to God's glory. God doesn't hate me. God isn't cursing me. This is an opportunity for God's glory to shine as I live in the power of Jesus and don't act on desires I've had since I've been a little kid. And that kind of testimony, it has so reached people in a postmodern community. It isn't saying, oh, just act on those impulses. God doesn't care. The Bible doesn't say that. But it also doesn't say, just pretend that, that is not there. Saying, look, this is my sin. Everybody's got sin. My sin may not be the same as yours, but in the power of Jesus, I cannot live out of conformity of God's law, and the result is God is glorified. He got that view from C.S. Lewis. C.S. Lewis said the same thing about struggling with same-sex attraction. He was talking about other people, but he's saying, look at it 9:2 as an opportunity for God's glory to shine. God give you the ability to live a chaste life. I think about Benjamin Warfield and his bride, Annie Pierce Kincaid. I don't know if you know who B.B. Warfield is. The church has always believed inerrancy about God's scripture, but B.B. Warfield's the one who coined that term. He helped the church clearly think about inerrancy. He taught at Princeton Theological Seminary, one of the best minds America has ever produced. His parents and Annie Pierce Kincaid's family, both well off. I think in his family there was a vice president, and in her family a Supreme Court justice. These were powerful, wealthy, influential people. They met each other and fell in love, and Warfield had studied in Germany, and so he wanted to give her the pleasure of seeing Germany. So on their honeymoon, that's where they went. And I want you to imagine if this were you. You're 2 weeks into your marriage. On your honeymoon, you're walking on mountain top and a thunderstorm comes. And nobody really knows what happened. All they know is that there was no place for them to hide. B.B. Warfield is holding her in his arms as she's quivering in fear in this thunderstorm with lightning going everywhere. And no one knows what happens if she was hit by lightning or just the fear. But 2 weeks into their marriage, something happened to her mentally, and she was only a shadow of her former self. They said on a good day she could walk around in the rose garden. Most days she couldn't get out of bed for the rest of their life together. 42 years they were married. B.B. Warfield never left her more than 2 hours at a time. Their house was right on the campus. He would go give his lecture, and then he would go back to his house so that he could care for her. He would spend hours every day reading books to her. He loved her. He loved her till the day she died. When you look at a guy who coined the term inerrancy and trusted in Scripture, and then you see how that belief played out in his life of loving his wife well, even though in many ways she was a shadow of her former self. The devil meant that for evil. God meant it for good. God meant for his glory to shine, and how it did shine in Warfield's life and in Annie's life as well. Jesus views challenges and lack differently than we do. Jesus says we must work the works of God while it is day. Night's coming when no one can work. As long as I'm in the world, I'm the light of the world. Having said these things, he spat on the ground and made mud from the saliva. Then he anointed the man's eyes with the mud and said, "Go wash in the pool of Siloam," which means the one having been sent. And so he went and washed and came back seeing. And one of the things when you study a story in the Bible, you want to try to get into the story. And if we do that, this is where the man was, right here in the beautiful gate. This is the pool at Siloam. Imagine walking from Mercer, maybe to the front gate at the entrance where the lion sign is. So Jesus is telling him, go there and wash. And you can see that this is a pretty crowded city. So imagine walking from this room to the front gate. But imagine instead of being Bryan College campus, it's a bustling city. And imagine that you have mud and spit dripping from your eyes. Maybe picture it between classes. And so you're walking between classes and you're blind and people are looking at you with mud and spit on your eyes. And I don't know, what do you think people would say as you fumbled your way to the college entrance? Do you think somebody would callously say, "What's wrong with that idiot? What's on his face? Does that guy have mud on his eyes? Why is he doing this?" And if you imagine walking from here to the college entrance, every single person is going to make fun of that journey. How steep that journey was. This is a picture outside Jerusalem. It's not the same hill he would have walked down, but it's a similar hill. And so if we're here, imagine walking down that. This is a man there. You can see a little man. and he's walking to like way down here. This is going to be a difficult journey for him to make. He's going to have to feel the wall, and he's going to run into people, and people are going to talk about how stupid he is and how bad he looks. And he's going to have to do that until he goes all the way to the college entrance. That seems very strange, given the fact that Jesus could just say, "You're healed." If you imagine that journey, this is the actual pool that he was going to. It's being slowly unearthed. It's the main water reservoir for Jerusalem. And he goes and he washes and can see. So where else in the Bible does it talk about mud, dirt, or dust? And we've already said, well, the creation of Adam. Remember that you made me out of the clay. And in fact, that word clay, palon, I think it is in Greek, is the exact word that's being used here. Jesus made palon and put palon on the man's eyes. Where else is spit used in this story? Well, usually spit is a negative thing. So it's Adam and this negative thing, and he smears it all over the guy's eyes. You made me a byword of the peoples. I am one before whom men spit. This word palos, if you've ever read that section that says, all our righteousness is as filthy rags. That's 2 verses up from this verse. But then Isaiah says, but now, Lord, you are our Father, and we are the palos in your hands. We're the mud, we're the clay, and you can fashion that clay or mud, and you can make it into stuff. You're the potter, we're the work. All of us are the work of your hand. And so Jesus making palon that's what Yahweh did when he made Adam. So is this like washing off fallen Adam, but maybe remaking eyes so the man can see? And of course, Jesus was spat upon as he walked in the world and as he died for us. The Bible talks about blindness and says things, but to this day the Lord has not given you a heart to understand, or eyes to see, or ears to hear. Have you heard that phrase before anywhere from Jesus? Let the one who has ears to hear. And this is talking about the Lord giving people ears to hear. All of these places talk about blindness. Isaiah, make the heart of this people dull, their ears heavy, their eyes blind, lest they see with their eyes, hear with their ears, understand, and turn and be healed. All of this is one giant theme inviting us to the whole Bible biblical theology. So when Jesus puts Adam on the man's eyes and puts spit on the man's eyes, there are a lot of negative elements about that. But the positive element is go wash in the pool at Siloam. Go wash in the one having been sent. And all of a sudden now you start realizing, oh, Jesus has just put 150 lifesavers in my hand. He's teaching me that I'm spiritually blind, and if I want to see, I've got to go wash in the one having been sent. All of us see the same way in washing in the one having been sent. This word Siloam appears in the Old Testament. In English, it doesn't look like the same word Siloa, but in the Greek, it's spelled Siloam, so it's the same word as this. And so the passage says this people has refused the waters of Siloam, the gently flowing waters, to rejoice over Rezin and the son of Remaliah. Therefore, the Lord is bringing up against them the waters of the river. So rather than rely on God and rely on the one that God had sent, they were trying to make their own way. And Isaiah is saying it's not going to work out well if you do that. The man washes in Siloam, washed in the one having been sent, and he can see. And then we have the strangest interaction between Jesus, the man, and religious leaders. The neighbors and those who had seen him as a beggar were saying, "Is not this the man who used to sit and beg?" And some people said, "Yes." And others said, "No, it just looks like him." He kept saying, "I'm the man. I'm the man." And they said to him, "Then how were your eyes open?" And he said, "The man called Jesus made mud, anointed my eyes, and said, 'Go to Siloam and wash.'" Notice that he omits that Jesus spat. Like, that helps you see how negative the spitting part, the man doesn't even include that when he retells his story. The man says, "So I went and washed and received my sight." And they said, "Where is he?" And the man says, I don't know." They brought him to the Pharisees, the man who had formerly been blind. Now was a Sabbath day when Jesus made mud and opened his eyes. So the Pharisees again asked him how he received his sight. And he said, "He put mud on my eyes. I wash and I see." Some of the Pharisees said, this man is not from God. He doesn't keep the Sabbath. In other words, they said the fact that he picked up dirt and raised it to put on the man's eyes meant that he had broken the Sabbath. Wow. That's pretty judgmental of someone else's walk with God, where you're saying lifting dirt up violates not working on the Sabbath, but that's where the Pharisees were. The man says, "He put mud on my eyes, I wash and I see." Some of the Pharisees said, "This man is not from God, for he does not keep the Sabbath." Others said, "How can a man who's a sinner do such signs?" And there was a division. So they again said to the blind man, "What about you? What do you say?" And he said he's a prophet. And so he's talking there. He'd been a poor beggar all his life. Now he's addressing what's the equivalent of the Senate chamber in America. He's addressing the 70 people who rule the country of Israel. The text says the Jews did not believe that he'd been blind and received his sight until they called his parents of the man who had received sight and asked him, "Is this your son?" And then they just kind of inexplicably add, "Whom you say was born blind." It's like, we're not sure he's been really blind all these years. How now does he see? And his answer, "We know this is our son. We know he is born blind. How he sees we do not know, nor do we know who opened his eyes. Ask him his age, he'll speak for himself." And then John says the reason they said that is because they feared the Jews. For the Jews had already agreed anyone who confessed Jesus to be the Christ be kicked out of the synagogue. Therefore, the parents said, "He's of age, ask him." For a second time, they called the man who had been blind and said, "Give glory to God. We know that this man's a sinner." And the man says, "Whether he's a sinner or not, I don't know. But one thing I do know is I was blind and now I see. I sat at the door. You walked by me every day. You couldn't heal me. He could heal me. I don't know what else is true, but I know he opened my eyes." That seems like the ultimate apologetic. You know, people are looking for a way not to believe, and it's like, I can't answer your question, but I know this was true of me before, and this is true of me now. They said to him, "What did he do to you? How did he open your eyes?" And he answered them, "I've told you already, and you would not listen. Why do you want to hear it again?" And then the man kind of gets a little sassy and says, "Do you want to become his disciples?" And they reviled him, saying, "You're his disciples. We're the disciples of Moses. We know that God spoke to Moses. But as for this man, we don't know where he comes from." And the guy couldn't give up. I mean, he had never talked back to anybody, and now he's talking back to the 70 religious rulers. He says, "Well, this is an amazing thing. You don't know where he comes from, and he opened my eyes." And now the man is saying, we know. They had been saying, we know, and you're ignorant. And now the man is saying, you're ignorant. We know that God doesn't listen to sinners. If anyone is a worshiper of God and does his will, God listens to him. Never since the world began has it been heard that anyone opened the eyes of a man born blind. If this man were not from God, he could do nothing. And they answered him, you were born in utter sin. Notice they're assuming the exact same thing the disciples assumed. You were born in utter sin. Would you teach us? And it says they threw him out. They kicked him out. Funny thing, when religious hypocrites kick you out, Jesus is going to find you. Jesus heard they kicked him out, and having found him said, do you believe in the Son of Man? Man says, well, who is he, sir, that I may believe? Jesus said to him, you have seen him, and it's he who's speaking to you. Till that day, the man had seen nothing. Now he's seen God's Messiah. He said, Lord, I believe, and he worshiped him. He understood that Jesus was God, and that Jesus had recreated the ability for him to see. Jesus said, for judgment I came into the world, that those who do not see may see, and those who see may become blind. And some of the Pharisees heard him, said to him, are we blind? And Jesus said, if you were blind, you would have no guilt. But now you say, we see, your guilt remains. So this is a great story. It helps us see our own fallenness. It helps us see that everybody is saved the same way by washing in the sent one. And it also gives us a way to look at the difficulties that we have in life, that all of those are meant to glorify God. All right, so thank you very much, and I'll see you